Okay, so my name is Gustav Vella. I'm co-founder of a clinical research software company called Carelane. And today I'm primarily here as a contributor to open standards for clinical research via the HL7 FAR community in general, and then also via the Vulcan community. I've been an active member of both communities for a couple of years. I really enjoy doing work for the community here. It's really good feedback, and I really encourage anyone to join the team. So it's really open and very collaborative. So, exactly. So, before founding Carelane, I worked in one of the largest hospitals in Europe, and also which also has a large CCC. And my job there was building up and maintaining the clinical research infrastructure. And when you've been doing that for year after year, watching people manually transcribe data from records, you sort of wonder exactly this. Imagine a world where you really could have evidence which for safer, smarter medicines, and it isn't confined to those trial silos, but actually flows from real life care, every clinic visit, every lab results, every prescription. And sadly, that isn't the case yet. So that actually is the promise of real world data. And today I'll show you how HL7 FAIR and the Vulcan RWD implementation guide turn that promise into practice. So the Vulcan RWD implementation guide zeroes in on a minimal interoperable set of EHR-based file resources, and mainly they're used for retrospective use. I think it's important to understand that it builds on an existing IG, which is the International Patient Access IG. And what that does is it defines which file resources and profiles individual servers must expose so that clients' systems can reliably retrieve key information regardless of the country-specific guides. And it's mainly focused right now on the United States, obviously, but falling back sort of integrates well with IPA, with the International Patient Summary. It's actually quite compatible with Canada, Australia, and others where needed, who are using those. That's how we're using IPA. Just a second. Oh. So the back button is the red one? Okay, yeah, great. So I think I'd like to take a step back, and with RWD, we're not just replicating and replacing the clinical trial process. With real-world data, what you do have is you've got information generated in routine care, and it can only become real-world evidence when you're analyzing it to answer research and regulatory questions. But I think most importantly, and I think it's really the most important aspect, is that it complements trials by revealing how treatments work across diverse patients, long timelines, and everyday contexts. So it's actually adding value. And I'd like to show this in actually an example. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. So to explain what I mean is that classical RCTs exclude huge randomized clinical trials exclude a large part of the population affected by the disease that they're actually observing. And this is studies by partners of ours who basically analyzed the situation with candidemia. So candidemia is a fungal disease which which immunosuppressed patients are prone to. So when people are getting chemotherapy, it's actually quite widespread. But the problem is that these patients are usually in intensive care or in very difficult settings. And this study found out that we're actually excluding 99.2% of the population because they can't be included into randomized clinical trials. So imagine you're excluding basically most of the population and you actually need that data and you're excluding them because of the inclusion-exclusion criteria. What actually, it is a known problem that we have this situation, so we do have this known issue. And over the years, the FDA have aligned their policies to make trials reflect real care. And I'm proud to say that members of the Vulcan RWD group were close in contact with the FDA. We even had members of the FDA working for us, so had in the past. I don't have to explain why. And actually, these implementation guides were really implemented in parallel to what we were doing in the work group, and even the policies were implemented in parallel to what we were doing in the work group. So moving on, looking into specifically how actually these projects are implemented, it's quite a massive challenge. So the challenge is basically that you have to access data, you have to have consistent data, you have to have interoperability, and all those are big challenges. But that's where the IG comes in, because when you're building on the IPA 807 FHIR as a basis, and you've got the rules to extract the data, it actually allows us, in this specific case, it allowed us to identify cohorts faster, to retrieve data faster, and to map the study logic faster. So I'd like to show you how this works in a practical example. So a project which I find very motivating because it clearly shows the impact of our work. So this was a result of the analysis that we were actually excluding all those patients. Now we have a global study which focused specifically on candidemia caused by a specific species of Candida. And we set out to understand how antifungal tolerance and resistance relate to real-world outcomes. And we want to assess the activity of novel antifungals, which are in late-stage development. And what's really interesting about the study, I mean, doing this on a global scale is a really importance. And it's definitely a disease which is on the rise. So there are environmental factors. So it's basically probably also got to do with global warming, but at the same time also drug resistance, because most of the antifungals are actually gaining in resistance. And we've recruited 1,000 patients right now and counting. So it's 143 sites in over 5 continents. So it really requires, on this scale, you really need a multimodal approach for gathering and ingesting data. And I think what's really fascinating about this is that it's not only RWD project, but it's RWD at scale. And I think the only proof that you can actually deploy RWD is you really can do it consistently at scale. So finally, just to wrap this up, how did we make this work? So we did several things. So we have a solution which defines the target record in FHIR as a FHIR solution, which builds the study defining the study definitions and objects as FHIR elements in a questionnaire, but at the same time mapping them to real FHIR objects. So that helps you extract, so that really speeds our work up in extracting the data and lining up with the IPA standard and with RWD implementation guide. So we used structured data capture IG, which is a broader IG for capturing structured data in FHIR. But we also relied on evolving Vulcan IGs, so the schedule of activities and also the UDP, which you will be talking about. And in our context, so it's focusing on implementing the digital FHIR protocol. I'll let you talk about this, but I think it's really important to stress in relation to RWE and RWD studies is that the biggest challenge in getting the data out is actually having the protocol which specifically tells you which data to get out. And if you don't have that, you're basically going to the sites, you have to explain them, they have to do all that work. So today's protocols don't do that. So with that, I'll thank you and I'll pass on to you.
I think we're going to do questions first for you. We've got,
Okay.
if that's okay, Gustav. Thank you very much. That was really good. Does anyone have any questions on the real world data IG and the work that Gustav is doing? We have a microphone. Sorry, I'll get a few seconds.
Thank you for an interesting presentation. My name is Troels Mortensen from the Oscar project, where we're working on combining data in Denmark. The application of what you're working with for artificial control arm or external control arms using real-world data for that, is that also something that you are?
Yeah, definitely.
Into?
So most of the pharmaceutical people we work with use our solution to gain external control arm data. And using FHIR for that, so that's really interesting, the question, because there's been some discussions with the FDA about that. Actually using FHIR and all the audit events and the provenance resources which you have in FHIR provide you so much more evidence, and we're basically giving them the data. But then when they submit them to the FDA, they're throwing away half the data because the CDISC standards to submit that don't cover that data. So actually using FHIR to gain RWD data for external control arms is extremely helpful. And it also speeds up, I mean, we're also talking time to market and also time to use for patients. That really speeds up the process. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Gustav. There's a question here.
How has the work that you've done now changed expectations?
That's really interesting, yeah. So when we set out to do this project, basically there was the expectation that we would be able to do this globally, extracting the data directly from individual sites. Interestingly enough, the most difficult work was actually, it was easier getting the data out in Africa, so the sites there use systems which are standardized. And basically, in Europe, it was actually quite difficult to get all the data out, so you're partially getting data out. So we actually have a multimodal approach. I think the expectation today is that using AI offers you new approaches. I think at the Connectathon, we had agents talking with interfaces, talking to each other. And I think that's the next level where we have to move with the IG, because we need more flexible interfaces and mappings to be able to ingest data which is less structured, which is the case in Europe presently. Yeah. So yeah, there was a high expectation from the physicians that they don't have to type in the data and that they don't have to validate the data, but we had to build in a validation process, a data review process, and in some cases they had to go back to the records.
Another question? Thank you.
Okay.
You're making me work.
It's just a follow-up question for a use case, because you're basically addressing the issue of how the studies are being planned and actually excluding so many patients in a RCT trial. Couldn't you also use your platform or your approach to actually guide the clinical development departments when they are in the process of designing the study, and basically modeling the studies or doing different simulations to see how different inclusion and exclusion criteria will impact study size?
Yeah, definitely you can. So the nice thing about FHIR is, and easy about the work which Hugh's going to present, is that if you've got the upstream protocol modeled in FHIR and the downstream objects are modeled in FHIR, then aligning them together is sort of perfect because you've got the same structure. But then from a point of view as a software designer, software architect, you have to constrain yourself. So there are a lot of tools in modeling protocols. So where we make our cut is where we ingest the protocol and validate its consistency to the data points and the likelihood that there will be differences in those data points on different sites, but harmonizing that. So the level of granularity is going to have an effect. So we streamline that. So we just throw in the protocol and it basically processes all the data and the previous study rationale. And then it set up the study automatically by aligning the individual objects. And you can do that basically due to the fact that FHIR is so granular. Yeah.
Gustav, I've got a question, if you don't mind, and I haven't prepared you for this one, so I'm sorry. Throw it back if you don't want it.
Don't worry.
I know that your project is at the adoption phase now, and that you're looking for use cases to get out there and get organizations involved with the project. If you were to describe the perfect use case, what are you looking for? What would be the ideal example to show what the IG is capable of?
I'm going to have to rephrase this a bit. So I think at this stage, the IG needs to evolve into something different. Mm-hmm. So when we started the work on the IG, since then, a lot of things evolved. So AI came about, so there's a lot of work on different interface approaches. We've got schedule of activities, and we've got the utilizing digitized protocol. So I think we're at a phase where we really have to decide, do we really want to do the next version of the IG? Or maybe does it make more sense to regroup, see how we can actually combine elements of that IG into other IGs? And I think maybe one aspect where the IG could move forward is as a sort of registry of individual national profiles for even things which are evolving here with the HDS. So when I go to Japan, I've got different set of profiles. If I go to sites in Asia, I have different types of profiles. And finding those and the details and the experts behind that is a challenge. And I think that's the point where I see an effort where that element of the IG could stay. But then I think we have to merge or work with other IGs because I see us coming closer to using sort of the UDP in practice as a core part of what we do, because you have to define the data elements.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's the most challenging bit. So that's where I see the work evolving.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gustav.